Hey everyone, welcome to today's session of the madinapi Tech Talk and Office Hours. Today we have an exciting session coming ahead, so let's get things started. As usual, our agenda is going to be a walkthrough to what our community is all about. Then we'll have the session with Megan Bruce, end-to-end security for APIs in AI, and a tiny update for advanced API security product. Then we'll go at the end to the Q&A, and then we'll be wrapping up. This community is intended to be a serve to everyone across the world, to those enthusiasts around Apigee and application integration, so you can have these spaces in which you can learn about anything and everything and share your knowledge with everyone so you can continue thriving with both of these technologies. And so the rules is that we're going to have these sessions, presentations by tech presentations by our Googlers, or if you like to be part of this stage, you're more than welcome to share their knowledge with the community. We'd love to have someone that it's not a Googler in here presenting to the rest of us. We're going to have always Q&As as a format of office hours towards the end, so you can ask questions to the topic that was presented, or if you have something else that you'd like to bring to the table, you're more than welcome to do so. All of these sessions are recorded, and you'll be able to find them in the Google Cloud community alongside with the slides and other materials we may share. And we're going to be meeting almost every Thursday, so we look forward to see you here continuously. For now, in this session, we invite you to share your questions throughout, so that if anything rises during one slide or one comment that it's mentioned, you can go ahead and ask your questions. We will love to keep these meeting really engaging and really interactive with all of you. That's why we do these sessions open, so that you can interact with us. And with that, allow me to present with you Megan, who is the speaker for today. Megan Bruce, she is a product manager for Apigee focused on advanced API security. She's based in Seattle. And prior to Google Cloud, she worked as a product marketing roles in VMware and as TopBlock, a software supply chain security startup. Welcome, Megan. Today she's going to be walking us through again to the end-to-end security for APIs and AIs and advanced API security update. Welcome, Megan.
Yeah, thanks so much, Alex. And as Alex said, please feel free to raise your hand or interrupt or ask questions. I definitely want to make it interactive, and I know we're a pretty small group today, so that would be ideal. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen 1 second here. Oops, I shared on the wrong thing. Okay. Cool. So as Alex said, I'm going to be talking about advanced API security. So advanced API security, can you give a thumbs up if you're already familiar with this product or you've used it before? Okay, cool. Thanks, Ahmed. All right. Nice. We've got some folks here. So some of this might be review for people who are familiar with advanced API security already, but hopefully there'll be some new information for everybody too, and definitely hoping to speak more to all of you in the community and keep you updated on what's coming here, because we're doing a lot here in 2025 with advanced API security, a lot of improvements that we'll be rolling out. So just to dive right in, the way that we think about API security within Apigee and advanced API security is we think about it as a multi-layered approach. So a lot of customers, when I'm talking to them, will ask me, I already have a web application firewall. Maybe I'm using Cloud Armor or F5 or whatever third-party web application firewall you might be using. And some customers will say, I already have that in place, so I think we're good. We don't need a security product on top of that. And the reality is that you need both. You do need a WAF, you absolutely do. So we're not suggesting that you shouldn't have a WAF because we need it. But what you do need on top of that WAF is, the application layer security protections that Apigee provides. So if you're familiar with Apigee already, which I'm sure you all are since you're part of this community, Apigee has a number of security policies already baked into the platform. And advanced API security layers on top of that to provide additional protections. And so I'll be talking more about the capabilities of advanced API security today. But at a high level, the things that advanced API security can support are abuse detection that basically takes a look at your long-term and aggregate traffic patterns of your APIs at an environment level and compares that to what's happening in real time. So it can basically help detect anomalies based on your specific traffic patterns. The other thing that advanced API security provides is the ability to protect against security misconfigurations in your API proxies. So we'll get into a little bit of that as well. But the thing to remember is that if you're really trying to, have a holistic security approach, you want to start with the WAF as the sort of outermost layer, and that's going to protect against the network layer attacks, DDoS protection, geofencing, that kind of thing. But when it comes to API security specifically, a WAF alone is not going to be enough. I did want to touch on, though, some of the capabilities that we're providing natively in Apigee for AI security. We had a session at Next that a lot of folks attended. It was a pretty popular session, which is telling us that this is a topic that a lot of folks are interested in. So Apigee is actually releasing 3 new policies this month. And we talked about these at Next, so I'm happy to share them with you. They'll be available in a couple weeks. The first one of these policies is from Model Armor. So if you're not familiar with Model Armor, that is, it was recently a GA product from Google Cloud that basically helps protect against, it protects for AI safety. So think about, chatbot type of applications. You could basically configure Model Armor templates to do things like protecting against prompt injection attacks, to protect against sensitive data leakage, to make sure that, harmful information isn't given to end users from your LLM. So there are a lot of different configurations, a lot of different sort of knobs that you can configure in Model Armor. So check it out if you haven't yet and you're doing Gen AI, you will need something like Model Armor for sure. But basically what we're doing in Apigee is supporting a first-class policy within Apigee. So you could have this policy as part of your pre or post flow or both. And you'd be able to do a service call out to Model Armor to do prompt and response sanitization. Yeah, thanks, Alex, for posting that documentation. So that's one thing, and that'll just be, again, that's just part of the native Apigee platform. It's not anything additional. You do have to be using Model Armor as well. But if you're using Model Armor, you'll have this policy available to you. It's part of the Apigee policy portfolio. The other thing we're releasing is semantic caching. So I'm going to show you a demo in a bit that shows how we're kind of bringing together Model Armor and semantic caching for AI safety. But semantic caching, just from a general perspective, is really can help improve latency in the user experience in AI applications. So think about a chatbot experience where you might be typing in a query that says like, "Why is the sky blue?" And then someone else later types in a query that says, "Sky's blue, why?" Those are similar, basically identical prompts. And so you don't want to necessarily go and hit your backend service and consume resources every time a similar prompt is entered. So we can support that through semantic caching. And from a security perspective, that also helps with managing resource consumption. And then finally, server sent events. So we're excited to be launching a completely new type of flow in Apigee that will take a media type. And so that basically supports events and executing policies on a per response basis. So that'll be good. There are specific use cases where you might want to use that for AI. And so that'll be available later this month as well. So lots of things coming out. If you're hearing about things like AI gateways in the market, our stance here is that AI gateways and AI governance is just a use case for API management. It's just like having a SOAP gateway, which you wouldn't call it a SOAP gateway. It's just part of your API management or your API gateway. And that's how we're viewing these kinds of policies for AI as well, is that we're just baking those natively into the Apigee platform to provide, a robust set of capabilities for you for any sort of API management use case. So that's a little bit about what's coming. Super excited about those. But getting a little bit back, well, actually, let's watch a quick demo, and I'm going to speed this up. This one was already shown at Next, so I know it's best to do demos live, but I have a recording of this one, and I happen to think it's a pretty good one, so we should just use this. So let me do the playback speed and speed this up because it's going to be it's 5 minutes long. But what you're seeing here on the left is an agent application. And then what you're seeing here on the right is obviously the Apigee debugger. And you may notice we recently launched a new version of our debugging UX in the UI. So it looks a lot slicker now. So definitely check that out if you haven't seen it. But what this is going to show first is here's a list of queries that we're testing. So I talked about semantic caching. So you can see this user enters a query, "Why is the sky blue?" Now, if we look at the Apigee debugger, we can see how long it took to actually go back, hit the service, get the response from the model, and return that to the user. And then we can see that this is all tracked here in the debugger flow. So it's showing that successful call out to Model Armor, that Model Armor went through and sanitized that as well and didn't find any issues with it. So now let's take a look at what happens if another user says the sky is blue, why? So you can see that we're getting a response here that's much, much faster because we had semantic caching in place there. And again, we can go back and look at the debugger and sort of view the whole flow of how that worked and the Model Armor policy not flagging anything in there either. And so if we look at another type of query or a type of prompt rather that a user might put in here, I'm just skipping ahead in the video. So the next prompt that we're going to enter is something that's more dangerous. So how do I create explosives? So when you put that in, you can see an immediate response here from the agent saying, I can't respond to you. That's not allowed. And if we look at the debugger here, we can tell that this was flagged specifically as dangerous. And that's because of the Model Armor template configuration. So when the Apigee did a service call out to Model Armor said, yeah, no, these types of topics are not allowed with this agent. And then, we returned that response. And then the next prompt here that you're seeing is asking for sensitive information. So you don't want, obviously, this agent to return data that could be sensitive, and Model Armor supports that kind of sensitive data leakage protection. And so again, you're seeing here, this is flagged as sensitive data, and that's why the response here is showing that, I can't give you that. That's sensitive information, essentially. And then the final thing here in this demo that we're showing is an attempt here to jailbreak or, prompt injection type of attack. And you can see immediately the user or the agent's responding here that that's abusive. And again, if we go back and check, we can see again that this was flagged by Model Armor per the template that that user configured as a jailbreaking attempt, and that response was returned. So definitely pretty powerful when you combine Model Armor with Apigee and consider the fact that, you could have this as part of a shared flow that applies to all of your API proxies and really kind of scale out the use of Model Armor across your organization, especially if you're starting to get into Gen AI. So just moving on to the topic that we're going to spend most of the time on today. First, I just want to pause there. Any questions from anyone on the call about what we just talked about?
No questions in the chat, Megan, but anyone feel free to raise your hand or open the mic.
Yeah, or feel free to type into the chat and we can always get to it later if you think of it. Okay, so we're going to move on to advanced API security. So I know there are a number of folks on the call who are familiar with advanced API security, which is great. If you're not familiar, advanced API security right now is an offering for Apigee X and hybrid. So right now, advanced API security does not work for Edge or OPDK, but it is available for X and hybrid today. And so that means it can work on Google Cloud, but also any other cloud, because a lot of our hybrid customers obviously are using Apigee on other clouds as well. So it is an add-on. So like some of these other boxes here that you see, monetization and advanced API security can be added on to Apigee X or hybrid for additional capabilities around security. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the use cases and why we see customers using advanced API security. So I'll give you a couple examples of, maybe real world incidents that could happen. So the first example is basically like leakage of an API key or API credentials, like a client ID. And this can happen because, maybe it's exposed in code accidentally and not picked up by secret scanner. It could happen through a phishing attempt. There's a number of ways that keys and client IDs can be leaked. And obviously those can be detected by malicious actors who can use them to access and attack your APIs. With advanced API security, specifically what we look for is these kinds of attacks. So we look for deviations in what's normal, again, for your specific traffic patterns. So let's say, normally in your production environment, you have, a pretty low response size, and most of the traffic comes from North America. And then all of a sudden you're seeing a lot of traffic coming in this environment from Russia. And maybe all of a sudden the latency is a lot higher and the response sizes, the payloads that are being returned there's like an incident of a scraping attack that would be abnormal based on what we normally see in that environment. And so in that case, we would flag that and say, this does not look normal. So the thing to remember there is that if you're using just a WAF, you're not necessarily going to get the WAF to pick up on these types of attacks that are using valid credentials and doing things over time that look suspicious. Another example here would be, let's say we have a developer who is updating the configuration of an API proxy. And let's say they actually update the configuration of a shared flow, which is used by multiple API proxies that are already deployed. And let's say that person removes an important policy like a quota policy. It can happen, just maybe happens by mistake as they're editing the configuration, or they're deploying a net new proxy and they forget to add that. So in that case, we have a feature within Advanced API Security that helps protect against security misconfigurations. And so what Advanced API Security would do here is basically dynamically check those proxies that are deployed, including shared flows. So it's pretty powerful in that way. And it can look at and compare basically you can create a security profile that says these policies need to always be on the proxies in this environment. And then it will look at all the proxies in that environment and say, okay, all of a sudden this policy is not there. And then you can configure that so that can send you an alert immediately and let you know, hey, that's not there. And perhaps more powerfully, that we do have an API for this. So you can integrate that, and a lot of customers do this, integrate that into CI/CD pipelines so that, for example, if a developer tries to deploy a change like this, that it's blocked and the developer can see a reason or an explanation for what they need to do to fix that. So security misconfigurations are a big use case for Advanced API Security. The final example here is, let's say a developer, leaves the company, but they have a lot of APIs that they didn't necessarily clean up before they left. And those APIs aren't cataloged anywhere. Maybe they were developed for a test project that was discontinued. So there are these APIs that are sitting out there that aren't being maintained, which poses a security risk. So within Advanced API Security, we support shadow API discovery. And the way that we do this is we actually look at the activity behind the load balancers. So that allows us to do this in a way that's agentless. So we don't need you to have to deploy an agent. We can do this simply by observing what's going on with the APIs behind a load balancer, and then exposing those observations to you so you can detect whether something looks unnatural. So shadow API discovery is another use case here for Advanced API Security. I mentioned a WAF, and so just to be super clear, sometimes it's helpful to have these kinds of charts to understand where a WAF is strongest and where Advanced API Security comes in. And so obviously a lot of folks use Cloud Armor or a WAF, third-party WAF solution for that L3, L4 layer defense, DDoS defense in particular. The thing that, again, Advanced API Security can really help with are some of those use cases that we just talked about. So just something to keep in mind, we really, really emphasize that customers use both to have a really comprehensive security solution in place for APIs. I wanted to share these slides. We had BMW, who is an Advanced API Security customer. Yeah, Anil, go ahead.
Yeah, so the Cloud Armor piece that you said, right? So Advanced API Security is different than Cloud Armor, right?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And I have one question. So one of the one challenge that we run into is basically we have Cloud Armor and everything there, but let's say the traffic is coming from other regions, like you mentioned, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if we want to block that, what happens is basically that call is already in Apigee, and it goes against our quota. So that's why we added a Cloud Armor. So
Yeah,
this Advanced API Security, can it help us in that scenario? Because like if someone start really bombarding the API, right, then
Mm-hmm.
we want those goes against our licensing. So
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Go ahead, Anil. Go ahead and finish. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So in like how this can help in those scenarios to save some of our licensing cost.
So this is the power of using both of these solutions together. So basically in that situation, what Advanced API Security would again be really good at is detecting any changes in your traffic patterns. So let's say there's a surge in traffic from a country that's not normally seen in that environment for you. As the example, there's a surge in traffic from Russia, and you can identify the IP addresses that are causing that traffic. The
Okay.
best practice would be, you can block that using a security action in advanced API security, and that will block it, but it blocks it at the proxy layer. What you really want to do, to your point, is block it at the firewall layer, because that way
Right.
it never even goes through to get to your API proxies. So that's where we say it's powerful to use both together, because you can identify those attacks in advanced API security and then block them at the WAF layer.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. That comes up a lot. So BMW, as I mentioned, they were on stage with us at Next last year. They're a big advanced API security customer. They use it particularly because they have a high surface area that can be attacked. And so you can see here what they presented was that Apigee helps them react to threats based on security policies that are natively in Apigee, and then the detection rules that we have in advanced API security. But this is what BMW does, which is kind of speaking to Anil's question. So they have a web application firewall. That's the first layer of defense there. And that's, their traffic's going through that firewall. And then it's hitting Apigee and the proxies, and it's hitting those security policies. And then advanced API security is also processing that and making sure that, that traffic doesn't look suspicious. But if something does look suspicious, then they give that information back to the WAF to block it there. So that's exactly the type of architecture that BMW has in place. I wanted to mention OWASP top 10 for API security. So if you're on the security team, if you're talking to your CISO, a lot of folks are identifying what security tools they should be using based on this guidance from OWASP. And so here on the left is the most recent list from OWASP that was published in 2023 of the top API security threats. So they're roughly broken into the categories here that we summarized on the right. But the kind of key takeaway here is that within advanced API security, we can help you protect against all of those OWASP API security threats through the different capabilities that we provide. And we do actually have a white paper, and I'll have a link to this at the end, that details exactly how we help mitigate those threats. So this is just very high level, but if you want to get more granular, it's a fairly lengthy white paper. It's very skimmable, but it'll have all the details in there about how you could mitigate against BOLA, BOPLA, all those acronyms, and all those types of threats by using Apigee and advanced API security. So just know that's something that's out there to help you, think about how you're going to implement robust security protections and make sure that you're mitigating all of those common threats. So I'm just going to briefly go through these features and explain them. And those of you who are already familiar with advanced API security, hopefully this is a little refresher for you, but also I'll speak about some of the new capabilities that we've released with these two. So I talked about security misconfigurations. So we have a feature in advanced API security called risk assessment. And this is really meant to protect against API security misconfigurations. So what you can see here in these screenshots is that essentially within advanced API security, you set up a security profile, and that is integrated with Apigee's native security policies. And so you can assign a weight to each of those policies. So here is an example of the Google default profile on the right. And you can see, there's an authorization policies check set as major, because that seems pretty important. CORS policies checks, TLS check, all these kind of important security standards that are set in Apigee. And you can set weights to them to make sure that you get flagged if the security score changes. So we have an integration with cloud monitoring and cloud alerting that's integrated right into risk assessment. So it allows you to set up a monitoring condition for the profiles that you're configuring, and then you can set up alerting. And we have out-of-the-box alerts with cloud alerting where you can just very easily set up an alert and configure a threshold. So you could essentially say, okay, anytime this drops below 50%, the score, or 75%, which would mean, maybe it doesn't have the authorization policies that it needs to have. And so it's getting the security scores going down. You can set that up so that you get an alert and you can immediately know that something's wrong with the deployed proxy and fix it. So really powerful there, just to make sure that you have checks in place so that every proxy that's going out there and that's deployed meets your desired security posture. So another feature in advanced API security that I touched on a little bit is called abuse detection. So within abuse detection, we have a set of rules. We have static rules, which there's about 7 different ones, and there's a link in our docs I can share as well. But there's a set of static rules that looks at different heuristics like OAuth abuse, 403 rejection errors. It looks for some common examples of API security issues and flags traffic that meets those rules, those heuristics. The other thing, as I mentioned too, is we have dynamic machine learning models as well. So we recently made some changes to our anomaly detection model, for example. And the algorithm that's underneath that is actually an algorithm that's used internally at Google for anomaly detection. So it's a really powerful algorithm that is trained to find anomalies in traffic. And again, it's training on your specific data, which, by the way, is never shared across customers. It is your data, not shared. So it looks at your historical traffic patterns, again, and it builds a model or an understanding of what normal traffic looks like in your production environment. And then it runs this model against traffic in real time and then looks at, hey, does this look different from the model that we know is true? And this retrains hourly, so it's constantly retraining and understanding your traffic patterns to reduce the chances of false positives. We're putting a lot of effort this year into making this model as powerful as possible because we know that customers need to be able to detect suspicious attacks. The other thing that we support, as I mentioned, is security actions. So I'll get into that in another slide, but we don't want to just support detection. We also want to support taking action against anything that's flagged as suspicious. So detection of anomalies and attacks, this is just an example of what this looks like. So what you can see here on the right is something that we launched recently we call internally basically IP address drill down. So we provide a lot of information when we detect a security incident that if you click on an individual IP address or API key that's involved in that incident, you can get a lot of information about that, including like app key, the region associated with that or where that's coming from, the response codes that were being received there. A lot of information to essentially help you triage what's going on and make sure you can determine whether or not this needs to be investigated further. Alert and triage. So I mentioned, again, alerting is integrated here. So we have an integration with cloud monitoring, but also importantly, we know a lot of customers use third-party solutions as well. So Apigee has a message logging policy, and through that message logging policy, you can basically log events out from Advanced API Security and Apigee, send out platform logs to any third-party tool. So a lot of customers may use like Splunk, for example. You can use the message logging policy to send data from Advanced API Security out to Splunk or out to whatever SIM tool your security team uses to make sure that they can get that information and properly triage an attack. We also recently released a SecOps parser. So for customers that are using Google SecOps for their SIEM SOAR, we support being able to use that message logging policy and send out data to SecOps that is parsed in the SecOps schema. And then taking action. So I mentioned security actions. Anil asked a question about that earlier. So you have the ability to flag or block traffic. So for example, if you just wanted to flag traffic, something, if you're taking kind of a honeypotting type of method, maybe you don't want to let the attacker know that you've discovered something yet, you can actually flag that traffic and set up a sort of custom message or custom response so that the attacker doesn't get access to your API, but may not necessarily know that you've discovered that they're trying to attack. Or you can just flat out block that. And again, that will block it at the API runtime layer, at the Apigee runtime layer. But you'll want to, when you're assuming you're using a WAF, which most folks are, you'll want to also block that at the WAF layer to make sure it absolutely does not get through. One thing that we're doing within Advanced API Security is using AI, and actually this is more broadly with Google in general, as I'm sure you know, but the Google security profile too is thinking about how we use AI to make things easier for you when you're trying to triage incidents. So on the left is an example of if you're using Google SecOps again with Apigee and with Advanced API Security, there's a lot of features built into that to make it easier to triage through Gemini. So being able to generate search queries using Gemini, but also the one I think is really helpful is the ability to create and edit a playbook, an incident response playbook using Gemini and SecOps. And then on the right is just something we're experimenting with that we launched last year, which is integration with the SecLM model. So that's a custom machine learning model that was developed by Google and is trained on security data. So that basically helps tailor these kind of incident summaries that we provide to with the security lens. And so essentially what that does is every time we find a security incident, we tell you, hey, this looks suspicious. We give you a summary as well of what's going on with that, so that you don't have to comb through all this data necessarily. You can get that kind of quick summary of what's happening and triage further as needed. In terms of roadmap, so we're being a little bit general here just because this is a broad community call. So unfortunately, we can't present any NDA information. So if you are an Apigee customer, please contact your CE. We'd be happy to do a more detailed roadmap session with you. But broadly, at a high level, the areas that we're focused on this year for API security in general within Apigee, the first is shadow API discovery. So we've heard this request loud and clear from our customers that shadow API discovery and cataloging and management of all of your APIs in one place is really, really important. So we are investing a lot of effort on the engineering side this year in shadow API discovery and improving that capability in advanced API security. Abuse detection. So I mentioned we've updated our algorithm. We are focused a lot here too on making sure that we're doing everything we can to help you detect suspicious traffic and do something about it. We're also investing a lot in reduction of false positives. So we have a number of ways coming out later this year to just make it easier for you to mark false positives, to understand what's happening more in abuse detection and take action and understand if it's suspicious or not. Security integrations. So we want to be able to support integrating with other Google Cloud security tools as well as third-party security tools. So that's an area where we're investing a lot of effort into. Again, today you can use the Apigee message logging policy to send data out to any third-party tool. What we're looking into is how to make even more first-class integrations here. And AI agents and LLM security. So we did a lot of sessions about this at Next and a lot of demos at Next. So stay tuned for future community calls because we have a really great demo that we did on AI agent security that I think would be probably of interest to this group and other folks. And so we'll probably have that in an upcoming session too, because there's a lot of interesting stuff, a lot of work and effort is being done across Google right now obviously on agents. And so security is a big part of that. And we're looking at that to see how we can support you with agent and LLM security beyond what we already are launching this month. And then finally, I mentioned the white paper. So if you're interested in understanding more about how Apigee and advanced API security can help you mitigate these threats, and specifically what policies you need to implement, what types of actions you should be taking in Apigee and advanced API security, this will basically walk you through that. So check it out. This links to a blog post that summarizes it, but there is a white paper that's free and not gated that's linked right there. So I'll pause on this one just to make sure everybody can get the QR code. But any questions about anything we just talked about, or any thoughts or feedback at all? Yeah, Anil.
Yeah, actually, I was looking from AI perspective, how we can help developers basically. So in enterprise, right? So one of the challenge that we face, right? Basically, developers, right? We have to train all the developers to, build API proxies.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time questions comes like, how much is the development time? Because we have to not only Apigee proxy, but we follow CI/CD and test case and all those kind of things with the, all the enterprise, because you just cannot go with the API proxy. There has to be test cases and all those things, right? So
Yeah.
I was actually looking for something which can help. So let's say today developer takes 3 days. Is there any way we can help them to build everything and bring it to AI stuff and bring it to maybe 15 minutes, 1 hour? So that will give a lot of saving to the enterprise, and adoption will be very high. So
yeah, and Anil, are you talking specifically about development of proxies and simplifying that process?
yeah, simplifying that area.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll give you one link to our documentation. So Gemini Code Assist and Cloud Assist are two investments we've been making. On the Gemini Code Assist side, so there is a code explain functionality that's linked there. And I'll just, I'll bring this up here too. So this is an example from our documentation, but essentially what this does is it allows, it helps make this process easier. Now, there's a lot more we can do here, and we will be doing here. But one thing this does is it helps explain the policies that are in those proxies. So let's say you have a developer who's editing the configuration of a proxy, and they don't necessarily know what the policies are that are already set up in that proxy. They can basically highlight those, and they'll give an explanation of what that policy is doing using Gemini Code Assist. So that's one thing, but I think there's probably a lot more that we could do there too, and we're looking at that.
Yeah, we tried that, but I mean, just my opinion, I felt it's a little bit very beginner, or because we like the enterprise usually, right? You already identified all the patterns, and we have our templates. So if we can get some flexibility to be able to train AI models for our requirement, like basically, for example, we have 5-6 templates, and we know, and then with few changes, they should be able to deploy a proxy. So something like because when I tried that, and I was asking different kind of question to the link that you posted, right?
Yeah.
But it cannot build a full-fledged proxy. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah. Yep, that's great feedback. I'm actually gonna, we've been hearing that a lot from customers, so I'm gonna share that with our developer experience PM. Yeah, and because we have, and you've probably seen, if you've used Code Assist, you've probably seen the way that we're simplifying the actual creation of an API spec using Code Assist. So you can just chat as a developer, you can just chat with Gemini now and your ID, and basically say like, create an API that does, I don't know, card payments, or I'm just making something, whatever. And it will generate that open API spec for you. And there's an integration there with API Hub too. So if there's like a common security scheme that you use that's stored in API Hub, it'll pull that information into the spec. And it'll also do things like reference other APIs and other components that are in API Hub to help with reuse. So it might say, you already have one of these APIs in your organization, here it is. So those are things we're doing to simplify the process of actually creating an API spec and publishing an API and getting that into API Hub. But we have, that's the first step we're taking. And I think the next phase we need to get to is how to make proxy development easier too.
Okay. Yeah, I have another question, but I will
maybe just one point additionally on that one, Anil. So another topic that we do often with customers is also using templating for proxies, right? So there's really interesting tooling. I mean, one tool is called Apigee GoGen, which can, for example, like create a proxy from a spec using templating. And also, if you have the proxy, but you need the spec, you can also go in the other direction as well.
Is it?
And yeah, and so I think this is the templating topic is really interesting because, the XML configuration is something that, new, people who are trying to configure it, it takes a learning curve to get into that. And the templating can help because you can say, hey, just provide, the OpenAPI spec or a JSON configuration with your own format, or however, your users are most comfortable delivering that information. And then using templating, you can just create the actual proxy configuration based on that, right? So there's lots of cool ways of doing that. Apigee GoGen is one approach. I've done it with other customers using other templating libraries. Additionally, just Gemini is very good at that as well, right? Because Gemini, just the standard Gemini is really good at structured configuration data, and it knows Apigee proxy formats very well. So you can also ask it to, hey, configure a OAuth policy or some other policy for Apigee, and it'll do a very good XML configuration of that as well. So the Cloud Assist is very specific, integrated into the GCP console, but just normal Gemini is also very good at that type of thing as well. Also creating open API specs. I use it all the time to create very nice specs. I think that's also a feature we're working on to, add some functionality around improving specs as well, right? To make sure they're well documented, that they're well structured. And so that's also really interesting topics as well. If you want to dive deeper on that, just reach out. I think it's a fascinating topic. I love working with customers on that. So just, proxy templating as a general keyword.
Okay. Yeah, that was actually my other question, like having spec. So I'll tell you once, like most of the teams, right, by the time they came to Apigee, for example, especially SAP developers, right, they are not aware of OpenAPI spec most of the time in my experience. So when they come, by the time they come, they just want to build a proxy, and when we ask for the spec, right, they don't have spec, so they ask question, right, can we generate spec based on this proxy or something like that quickly? So because they don't want to hand write the spec and everything. So I will definitely explore if Apigee Go Gen, you said, right?
Yes, Apigee Go Gen uses Go templates, which are very flexible, where you can also create your own templates as well. So I've worked with customers, for example, sometimes that, yeah, the Open API spec is too complex for their users, right? So they have more of like a reduced, just a kind of a, 5 properties, right? Backend, authentication, quota, configuration, just the basics, right? And then from that configuration file, generate the proxy, generate the spec, do everything automatically based on that, right?
Cool. Okay, we can definitely explore that. I think will be very helpful. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. That was great. Any other questions?
Yeah, if no one else has something. I have one question, Megan. So I've worked with several customers who use Apigee Advanced API Security, including BMW as one of our customers here in the region.
Yeah.
And I have one question regarding the the Google ML models that are used behind the scenes in. Can you give any background on that? And I don't know, just some, because I think I mean, obviously we can't probably give too many details on what exactly is going on there, but maybe just if you have any information, just to kind of because I think that's one of the big strengths of the platform, right? Is that you get a lot of these threat detection and pattern recognition kind of for free through those models. So if you have any just additional details or stories there, that would be great.
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking. We are about to update our documentation with a little more information on this, because I know it's fairly sparse right now. You're right that we can't. And sorry, I'm just reviewing this to see if it was updated. Not too much. So you're right that we can't say a whole lot about it. I will say, though, that it looks at basically the way that the algorithm works. So there's an ML model. It's based on an algorithm. The algorithm used is the algorithm that's used internally, as I mentioned, at Google, one of the algorithms. And so what it does essentially is it has basically 20 plus characteristics built into it that it looks for to determine whether something is an anomaly. And those characteristics include response sizes, latency, changes in latency, changes in traffic from specific countries, things like that. There's a lot, but 20 plus different characteristics that it looks at. And unfortunately, I can't name them all, because if we do that, then we give people an understanding of what we look for, which is a way to game the model. But so for security reasons, that's why we can't share. But I will say that I think the most powerful thing there too is that it is trained on historical Apigee analytics data. And so obviously the benefit of that is that it actually understands your specific traffic patterns. So it's not looking at all customers' traffic patterns and trying to discern anomalies. It's your traffic patterns. So if you're a retail customer, for example, and you always get spikes around the holidays, the model understands that if it has enough historical data, and it wouldn't flag that kind of a spike as anomalous. But if all of a sudden there's some crazy spike in, response size or latency at some time of the year that's not normal, that would be flagged. So it may not be a totally satisfying answer, but what we're working on is some updated documentation that lists out examples of things that we can detect. So I think that'll be helpful as well when we have that.
Cool, sounds good.
I think you're right, though. The power of those kinds of ML models is, again, that they are dynamic. So it's not just a static rule, and, abuse patterns change all the time. So the way that we've designed this too is, we need to keep it flexible. We need to make sure that this model responds to the way that attacks change over time and the way attackers get more sophisticated. And so we've designed it so that we can update it easily and quickly in the future too, to respond to new types of attacks. And I think that's the important part of dynamic models. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that would be something that would be really hard to build yourself, right? It's like, I think you can do manual policies and, apply, IP filters or different things that you want to apply, but building your own models to recognize threats or filter traffic, I think that would go beyond what I would most people would probably want to attempt. So that's cool that it's available as a service, basically, right?
Yeah, exactly. And something that Google's already using. So we know that this type of algorithm works. Cool. Great.
Thank
Well, yeah, if
you.
there are other questions, please feel free to, let us know if there's anything you want to dive more deeply into in a future session. We'd be happy to talk more about anything. I think the AI and agent security is something we'll hopefully have a session on soon, just to really talk more about our approach there, especially with all the announcements we made at Next around ADK and all the information going out around about MCP right now. There's a lot that we're doing here, and we'd love to share that in a future session. So. Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much. I really appreciate everyone's time and questions.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Megan.
Thank you.
Before everyone leaves, I'm going to quickly wrap up with some of the articles we have for you. Actually, Megan, you did this article last year on how to automatically flag and block suspicious IPR traffic. Is there anything that you can share us about this content so that everyone can go ahead and read it?
Yeah, that's just kind of some best practices for security actions and how to use them. I think some customers don't know necessarily where to start with security actions and what they should be doing. And so we put together a post that just goes into that in a little bit more detail. So if you're getting started with advanced API security and you want to understand more about how to use security actions, that would be a good resource to check out.
Thanks, Megan. And then for the rest of the resources, all of these are around topics on security. We even have one from Aldo in Spanish on how advanced API security can protect your APIs. And for the upcoming sessions, we'll look forward to seeing you here next week. Next week, we're going to be having Tyler walk us through an interesting topic. But then one more interesting one, in case you have members that would like to join this community, in Japan, we're going to have an API Jam on May the 29th. And in June 19, we look forward to all of our folks in Madrid to see you there for our summit, all around things API, integrations, and AI. Remember that this deck is going to be shared through the community, and you'll be able to get these links over there. But if anything you don't want to miss, you just go ahead within the Google Cloud community and click at the community events section so that you can keep updated on what's going on with us. And with that, thank you so much, Megan. It's been a really interesting and helpful presentation. And thank you for everyone who engages with us to keep the conversation going. Like Megan said, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to us through the Google Cloud community, and we'll be happy to connect with you. Have a nice rest of your day. See you soon, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.